Boardroom Bound, episode 132, Transitioning from the Military to the Boardroom and the Importance of Networking, with Larry Spencer.
I have found outside the military that networking is is almost as important, if not more important, than your actual performance or reputation. I mean, the best way to secure a position on a board is through networking and having someone that you know that will open some doors for you. In my case, that's exactly how it works.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's show, we're speaking with Larry Spencer. This is one of my annual fun episodes where I try to honor our military. And Larry is one of those rare people. He was a retired 4-star general, and he was actually the second highest ranking military member in the Air Force as the Vice Chief of Staff. Long and storied 44-year career. Amazing story about how it started. And now he is a successful board member on 3 boards currently, including Whirlpool, which is a name we would all recognize. And he's going to be very honest and open about what that experience was like for him. And we'll talk today about why our retired senior military members make incredible board members. Can't wait to jump into the show today.
Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about director certification. Want to join your first board, or are you looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach. Now, through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Coaching and Certification course, you get both modern board director candidate packaging and modern board operations knowledge integrated within one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation upon course completion. It's designed for individuals and groups. You can learn more at bit.ly/IBDC-D. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/IBCDC-D. And now let's jump into the show.
Larry Spencer, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it is an honor to be talking with you today, and I probably should have said retired General Larry Spencer. So this is one of those special episodes. I get to do a few of these a year where I get to speak to, in many ways, people that have done great and good work for our country and have done that in the military services beforehand and now are doing that in a boardroom. So it is an honor to spend some time with you today. And we're going to talk about your story. And I want people to think about this generally in terms of our service members, the incredible skill sets that they bring. Certainly the leadership is something we all know, but how that translates at whatever point they leave the service back into, say, the civilian world, what that can do. And so we're going to use some of Larry's story to talk about that today. But of course, this is one of the special times a year where we think even more about the people who sacrifice so much for us. So Larry, what I would love to do just at the beginning is you had a long and storied career in the Air Force. Can you talk about that before? Because then we're going to talk about how some of that experience translates across and how you got into the boardroom from that.
Sure. I've got my introduction to the military was certainly unanticipated and a bit unusual. But when I graduated from high school, I was a little bit lost, wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was the oldest in my family of 5 siblings. My mother had not graduated from high school. My father was an enlisted man in the Army. And so I was there first dealing with college. And neither of us had any experience or quite knew what to do. I had a ton of football scholarship offers, but really didn't know how to navigate that. And to be quite frank with you, I was living in my parents' basement after high school and found myself in a mall over in Maryland. I was born and raised in Southeast D.C. And I walked by an Air Force recruiter's office and I saw the airplane picture. And so as I was looking at the pictures, the recruiter stepped out, asked me to come in. I said, hey, I'm really not interested in joining the military, but he said, well, come on in anyway. So I sort of stumbled into his office, and about an hour later, when I stumbled out of there, I was in the Air Force. And that's kind of how I started. I started out enlisted, joined the Air Force with not one semester out of college, got into the military, enjoyed it, completed my degree at night, got my commission, and then once I became an officer and a second lieutenant, sort of worked my way up to four-star general. It was a career path that I wouldn't offer to others to emulate, but certainly one that's been interesting.
Now, Larry, I got to jump in here. I think you're being a little humble. I want to make this clear for our audience, and I certainly hope that recruiter got a nice bonus because you retired as a four-star general, and it is a very small number of people that make that rank. In 44 years, a distinguished career in the service. I believe you were the vice chief of staff, so that's the second highest ranking military member in the Air Force, right? So this is not you made it pretty far up the ladder here. So I think that person who convinced you, you're looking at the pictures, why don't you come in anyway? I hope he got a medal himself because that was an incredible career that you had.
Yeah, that is, I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Yeah, vice chief of staff was probably I couldn't think of a better way in my military career working with the chief of staff to provide leadership for the entire Air Force. It was just an incredible experience and something that I will treasure my entire life.
Now, I think what many people don't understand, I'd love if you'd shed some light on when we think about some of the most senior officers in the military, they've had varied careers because no one stays in one role for 40 years. You get moved around quite a bit for a lot of good reasons. For example, you were the first Air Force officer to serve as the Assistant Chief of Staff in the White House Military Office. People are often regularly working in the White House or Congress or different places, perhaps teaching at one of the academies. So there's so much different background experience that you get within, say, the larger wrapper of the Air Force. And I don't think most people really fully understand sort of the wide, varied experiences that someone might come out with. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about, I imagine being in that role probably changed some of your perspective, communication skills, and attributes like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, a great point, because folks, I think when they think about the military, they think of, military movies they've seen and, people in uniform and which is okay, but the military, if you step back for a second, it's not all that much different from a civilian career in that the military, and in my case, the Air Force, they had, the pilots and they had the engineers and nurses and doctors and lawyers and people that did maintenance and drove trucks and you name it. I mean, about every career area you can think of within the military. In my case, I sort of started out in financial management and then jumped around a little bit from financial management into logistics, supply chain, major repair and overhaul. And then, of course, once you reach a certain grade, you kind of transition into general leadership. So I had the opportunity to command a wing, which is essentially an installation, if you will, and then commanded just about every level, including being the CFO for the largest command in the Air Force. So you're right. I got to jump around and do a lot of neat things, like working in the White House, which involved, going to Camp David and, flying on Air Force One and, interacting with the president and his staff. And it was just a wonderful opportunity.
And I also want to put a little context around it. Imagine this as a business. So the Air Force has hundreds of thousands of employees. It has, I lose track of the tens of billions of hundreds of billions of dollars. So everyone who's leading in these major positions is basically running what's called a Fortune 500 company, perhaps. These are very large organizations that you're leading. And Larry, if we take all of that, and obviously you had an incredibly storied career, you've received so many different awards like the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Air Force Distinguished Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, clearly have been recognized as one of the best coming out of the military. And at some point you were thinking, well, this may eventually end. And after 44 years, it did. Give us a sense what that looked and felt like for you leaving that career that you'd never anticipated based on the story you told us so far and thinking about what life was going to be like perhaps outside in the civilian world.
Yeah, I was like many senior military folks, and I hate to admit this, but I'm just being honest here. I was completely unprepared to transition out of the military, not because I was worried about separating or retiring from the Air Force, but as the vice chief of staff, I worked 7 days a week essentially, and late nights, and so I literally worked up until the day I retired. So there wasn't a lot of time to think about what I was going to do. My plan was to take some time off, a couple of months, sort of decompress and think about what I wanted to do in the future. I had attended transition courses that sort of help you think through what you want to do. I attended the NACD course, Battlefield to Boardroom. And the reason I did that was because I did get to serve on active duty on a couple of boards, one for the Defense Commissary Service and the other for the Army Air Force Exchange Service. So I had board experience. I thought it was something I would like. I had a financial background, so I thought I could offer a good perspective to on a board, particularly given my leadership. So the transition was interesting, but I have to admit I was a little bit lost initially until I got my feet beneath me.
Why don't we just spend a few minutes helping everyone understand a bit more about the military versus in the civilian life? So, for example, on this show, we talk a lot about networking and how important that is. And let's say you are targeting, I want to be in the financial services industry. There's these certain types of companies, it might be a mutual fund board, it might be a bank, others that you might want to be on. Okay, these are the type of people I need to go and meet. It's a little different when you're in the military, right? Of course, you want to meet the right people and to know who they are. And I'm sure the 2-star generals are trying to connect with the 4-star generals, etc. But it's not like you're necessarily positioning yourself for the next role you're going into. That's not necessarily always how it works. So give us a sense what it looks like being in the military, what networking means there, so that we can all wrap our heads around it and compare it in contrast to the civilian world.
Yeah, well, networking is obviously important whether you're in the military or not. I think networking in the military is a little bit different because you generally get promoted in the military based on your record of performance and potential to achieve the next grade based on the assessment of your supervisors and commanders. I have found outside the military that networking is is almost as important, if not more important, than your actual performance or reputation. Because as you know well, getting on a board is not something where you fill out a resume and mail it in, and they give you a call and tell you to come in for an interview. I mean, the best way to secure a position on a board is through networking and having someone that that will open some doors for you. In my case, that's exactly how it worked. When I retired, I was struggling trying to figure out this whole board process and how one gets themselves on a board. I contacted the headhunter agencies that knew me. I had interviewed with a couple, but it was a slow process. And during my career, I was fortunate enough to meet and become friends with Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO for Facebook. And I shot her a quick email and said, "Hey, Sheryl, I'm new at this. You're a lot more experienced at this than I am. Tell me what I should do. How do I make this work? How do I get my foot in the door?" She turned around within an hour, email to several of her contacts, and a week later, I found myself sitting in Chicago interviewing for the Whirlpool board, which I got selected for. So, again, the networking, having someone that can open a door for you, someone who can vouch for you, that knows who you are and knows your capabilities, is just really, really critical.
And we should talk about that because, unfortunately, most of us don't probably have Sheryl Sandberg on speed dial, but clearly that's a good sense of what your network is and the circles that you're running in. And I think that you've really hit the nail on the head in some ways. We all need some mentors. We need some good guidance, some peers, people going to help us out. There are the people you want to talking with. The executive recruiters, of course, are key, going to the different trainings. But at the end of the day, you have a background and an experience, a position of authority, and that will resonate with certain organizations, but you still need someone to open the door for you. So Whirlpool, great first board to land on, right? Fantastic background and experience. So if that was how the first one came about, that's not the only board seat you have. Give us a sense of how the other ones happened.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of the Triumph Group, who supports the aerospace industry. Obviously, having been in the Air Force, I had an aerospace background. But once again, I knew someone who was on the board, and they actually contacted me and asked me, was I interested in taking on another board, and I was at the time. Um, and similarly with Haynes International, a board that produces specialty metals for the aerospace industry, I had a friend that was on the board who I had worked with on the Triumph Group board of all things. And they were looking for a board member, and so she asked me, would I be interested in joining that board? So it's really been pretty much all personal contact, personal relationships, and networking from people that know me, that work with me, that got me the opportunity to at least go compete for the positions.
And I'm going to guess here, and you can tell me if this is right or not. Once you had that first major board, like a Whirlpool, on your board resume, the conversations probably begin to change, right? You're in the space, you know what's going on. It probably raised your profile a little bit. Do you feel like it was a bit of a different process after that, or did it feel exactly the same as it did the day before that board ship happened?
No, there is no question about it. Boards beget boards, and so once you're on a board, you've got experience. You become really valuable to other boards because not only of your experience, not just your experience sitting on a board, but you have a perspective of how other boards and maybe in other industries operate, and you can bring that experience that you have to new boards and to help them grow and best practices and things you learn on a board. So clearly, being an experienced board member makes you a really valuable commodity to other boards. And to be honest with you, I have been asked since then, since my last board, to join a couple other boards, and I'm just not able to since I'm working full time. I just don't have the time. But yeah, once you get on the board and folks hear about you and your name gets out, then the situation changes quite a bit.
So, Larry, we talk on this show a lot about each person needs their own brand, their own position of authority, what they're known for. And we can probably all pretty easily wrap our heads around, okay, someone retires as a 4-star general from a military service. Okay, they might be an expert in things like geopolitical risk, risk management in general, could be aerospace if you're coming out of the Air Force, for example, a couple of sort of different areas. You need the cybersecurity, something like that. And you're okay, that's great. You hang your hat on that. And I imagine many of us go, okay, a Lockheed Martin, organizations like that, some of the ones you talked about, Haynes, Triumph, good places that have that fit and background, and those are natural. But Whirlpool's a very different beast. That's not going to feel very military to us. We could argue they produce machinery and some of the things are related to that. But just good business sense, I think, is a good value. And to some extent, the importance of the networking we've talked about is good. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because when I think about boardrooms, they require integrity, leadership, passion. To me, this is the fabric of military leaders. And this, when someone leaves from being a military flag or general officer, they have this in spades. And I don't know that every organization naturally thinks, oh, when I think about the diversity of stuff I want to bring in, we've traditionally looked at gender, ethnicity, race. But to me, veteran status, especially someone who's made it to the senior ranks, they've probably worked all around the world with different sorts of people. They bring a different mentality. And I wonder if you were speaking to some of, they say, the executive recruiters who are listening to our show, or people that are on boards already, a leading nom-gov committee listening to the show, how they should begin to actually think about people from the military who might be of so much value to their organizations.
Yeah, there's no question about it. So when I was interviewing for the Whirlpool board, one of the things I did in preparation was I did some study about the company. And one of the things that really impressed me, among being the largest appliance company in the world, their integrity, the way they did business. The CEO at the time told me that one of his mantras for the company was there is no right way to do a wrong thing. They are very honest. They're very forthright. and they're really committed to providing a good product to both at a good price. And so that sense of integrity, that sense of service, to make sure folks have what they need to conduct their lives, really drew me to the company. But I think, and vice versa, I think drew me to them because they knew I had the exact same character traits, the exact same focus on mission, the focus on integrity, honesty, doing the right thing. And so, yeah, I can't imagine if I were setting up a company, regardless of the industry, that I would want to have one or more former military folks on my board just for those reasons: the leadership, the experience, the ability to stay calm and work through crises, the experience working overseas and with international partners. It's just such a good fit. And quite frankly, I just enjoy all of my boards, sitting through the meetings, listening to the challenges, being able to talk to the folks on the board, being able to talk to the CEO, give them my experience, my advice, and work through issues with them. It's just, to me, one of the best opportunities I've ever had. And I think having served in the military for so long, it prepared me for those roles.
It's interesting the way that you described it there, because when I think about an organization and the types of, sort of well-rounded people that they want to have around the table, I love that you talked about like leadership under pressure, right? The ability to manage those situations. I think about things like organization, global strategy skills, courage, decision-making abilities. And to me, the people that are coming out who've led our military through the ups and the downs in places all over the world that we wouldn't even want to talk about, it's incredible to think how much that is needed in organizations when you think about all the terrible headlines we're seeing today where corporations are struggling or boards are struggling. And I imagine there's a bit of language that needs to be figured out, like TLAs. We love our 3-letter acronyms, perhaps, in the business world, but so does the military, right? So there's a different language being learned. There's a learning curve. But I imagine there's probably sort of a 50-50 split. There's stuff that you are bringing from your background experience translates across directly, but it's probably a lot of fun coming to those new opportunities, new situations where you're growing and developing in different ways.
No, absolutely. And in fact, I smile when you talked about acronyms because I thought that was a creature of the military, and clearly it is not. I mean, every board that I've joined, I've been blown away by the acronyms I had to figure out in the meetings. But you're right. So some of it is, natural leadership experience that I have, my financial background that I bring to the table. But a lot of it is my own learning and understanding how this company operates and what the ethos is, and how can they become more efficient, and how can they raise revenue, how can they take care of their people, and on and on and on. Things I've done my entire career. Take a company like Whirlpool as an example. That was a really good transition for me because Whirlpool has a very large veteran presence in their company. They've got 100,000 employees, but they have a lot of those are veterans, and so I was only on the board a month or so when this veterans group within Whirlpool asked me to come speak at one of their functions. They actually, which is interesting, I think, they build homes for homeless veterans. And of course, Whirlpool provides the appliances, and so they asked me to come speak, and that led into sort of a connection with their veterans in their company. So it was a really smooth transition, and I was very happy to see, not only with Whirlpool, but with the Triumph Group and with Haynes, most every company and industry we have, there are a good number of veterans in those companies. And so there's an automatic sort of kinship, if you will, that you strike up when you become a board member, because the folks that are working there feel like they have a connection on the board and someone that understands who they are and what they stand for.
That is a fascinating way to describe it, and I love that. So I'll go to a place that I naturally tend to think I'm a lifelong USA member, and when I look at, say, the USA board, I can imagine very few organizations that would have more former military people. And I know there's, for example, at least an unwritten requirement that I'd have a 4-star general retired from each of the 4 services, plus they usually have many more apart from that. but to think about the people within your organization and can they see themselves on the board? We would tend to normally think about that by gender or by skin color, some different ways, but also, does this organization respect and appreciate and understand me? And seeing someone who was like yourself, Larry, who has served in the military up there at the highest levels, that must be inspiring for many of them. Very exciting.
Yes, I agree. And by the way, I have a lot of friends on the USAA board, and I've been a member of USAA for years. But yeah, I agree. And I think I think one of the things that there was a challenge for me when I made my transition, not only to boards but to full-time employment, was think about this now. A person like me who entered the military when they were 18 years old, just barely 18, frankly. I've never had an experience with interviewing for a job or
Right.
filling out. I didn't have a resume. I didn't understand how to negotiate salaries or I wanted to get on the board. I didn't think about, well, wait a minute, before you volunteer to be on the board, you better do some due diligence and make sure that's a board that you want to be a part of and that you think you will be compatible with. And what about the other board members? Are you all going to get along and work as a cohesive group? So there's a lot to be done when thinking about board membership. Frankly, when I retired, I was looking for a list. I wanted somebody to hand me a list of boards and jobs that I could just look at that list and pick the one I wanted. It just doesn't work that way, as you know. I mean, you really have to force yourself to narrow down, what type of boards are you interested in? Where do you think you can contribute? In every interview that I've had for a board, one of the first questions I ask the CEO or chairman of the board is, based on my background and experience, how do you think I can contribute? Because to me, it's not about sitting on a board. It's about being a valued member of the board and contributing to the success of the company. And so my focus, and I think any board member's focus should be, how can you contribute? How can you make that company and that board better? And so I think sometimes in our haste to get on a board, we really don't think about, okay, wait a minute now, let's back up a second. What are you going to do once you get selected? How are you going to contribute? So a lot to think about, I think, when you're thinking about getting on a board.
I like that. And so, Larry, if we went back in time 5, 6-ish years to when you were retiring, or perhaps you're speaking to some other senior officers that are getting ready to retire now, and they're thinking about the next steps, the guidance, I would love to hear the guidance that you would give, right, to some people listening to this show today, thinking you just talked about so much there that as a business person, I would take for granted that I would know how to do and know what to do. But again, very different world when you're moving to civilian life. So what would you do differently, or what would you be advising people today, or the first couple of things that they should be doing in this large process of wanting to land a board seat?
Yeah, well, clearly the NACD course, Battlefield to Boardroom, was very helpful because it helped me understand how boards operate and about the committees and how the whole process works. But one thing I did, I think, that was most valuable was, and I'll just use network. I mean, I made a list of all of the former military folks that I knew that were on boards. And I called every one of them. I made an appointment with them. I visited them at their office or their home, and I sat down with them and I said, okay, tell me how this works. How do boards operate? What should I do? So initially, I was gathering information, because again, I didn't have this background. So I think it's important to prepare yourself through study, through networking, and then as best you can, try to figure out, where would you offer the most value in what industries and what types of boards. Try to narrow that down and then figure out, okay, how do I get my foot in the door for one of those opportunities? Do I know anyone on the board? They're easy to Google and find the board members. What I would do is every time I Googled a company, I would look through the board members to see if there was someone there I knew. And in a lot of cases there was, so I would just call them up and say, hey, tell me about this board. Do you think I would be a good fit? Do you have any openings coming up soon? So again, I think a combination of networking and research, and frankly, being honest with yourself and figuring out where you can most contribute. I think all of those things together should go into a board search.
Well, I want to compliment you there, because something that you did and even if it wasn't thought about in this manner, is sort of inside baseball in a very great way. So when we talk on this show, there's a big difference between, say, public company and private company board seats. And generally, public company board seats are never advertised. There's a lot of reasons for that. So the ability to call someone up who's on the board, who's a trusted confidant, and you can talk about your candidacy, is there something come up, would I be a fit? That is great knowledge that most people will never have. And that alone is changing your perspective of it as a viable candidate for an organization. So kudos for you for figuring it out. And that's something I would certainly advise for everybody. I agree with you. If you know someone, that's a great person you should be talking to. They should be someone who's an ally of yours, a supporter of yours. That's invaluable information. And Larry, I'm just smiling sitting here thinking about how fortunate we are to have you leading for the front of organizations today, right? So there is so much going wrong in the world at so many times. And it's wonderful to know that the leaders that we have trained up, and I can't think of any organization apart from the U.S. military service groups that are great at training great leaders, that we have them in the boardroom now, bringing the right skill sets, the right mentality, and helping all of them to be the organizations we need them to be, because that's great for our society. So we're delighted to have you there. And I would love, as we begin to think about how we wrap up this special episode, when you look back now over that experience, the last 5 or 6 years, and then you look forward, we've talked about some of the things that were troubles, challenges, hardships, things that were just not in your wheelhouse, but you've moved up that learning curve pretty quick. When you look out over, say, the next 5 years or so, and you think, okay, I'm going to continue doing this board stuff, this is great fun, what is the next sort of growth opportunity for you as a board member?
Well, great question. So I kind of think of my professional life in 3 phases. Phase 1 was the military. Phase 2, which I'm in now, is probably the most challenging because I work full time and I'm on 3 boards. Because phase 3 would be discontinue working full time and just board work from that point forward, or something similar to board work. And so the reason phase 2 is so difficult is because if you're fortunate enough to get a board opportunity, you have to be really careful about turning it down because, you don't know when that opportunity is coming again. And so and frankly, you're going to work a little harder than you normally would because, again, being on a board is work. I mean, most boards meet 4 times a year, some 6 times a year. But there's a lot of preparation for boards. There's a lot of work in between. There are board meetings between board meetings. There's a lot to know and understand and learn about your industry and your company. And so there's a lot of work put into that. So as I look forward to phase 3, it would be a transition away from my full-time job and really more focus on board work, maybe picking up another board or so. And so I'm starting to look at that now. What types of boards do I think I would be of value to? The other thing, that people don't like to talk about is, most boards have a retirement age, and so you can stay on a board a long time generally, but you can't stay on boards forever. And so all of that has to be factored in with your own age and your own sort of, when do you want to retire, and make all that work together.
Well, Larry, it was great advice today, and it was wonderful hearing about your wildly successful military career. Thank you for your service, and we're delighted to hear what you're doing in the boardroom now and how much you're enjoying that. We appreciate having you on the show, and thank you so much for your insights and helping all of our audience to be boardroom bound. That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Larry Spencer, and it was amazing to think this young 18-year-old guy who wasn't really sure whether he wanted to be in the military was talked into it. It led to a 44-year career, becoming a 4-star general, of which there are very few in the world, an incredibly high rank, and obviously a wonderful person who was very thoughtful about his career next steps, honest today with his struggle, of which we can all learn from when we think about how we think about our own individual skill set and brand, how that translates across, how we tap into our network, and of course, a wonderful story to hear about why our military men and women are such successful people when they translate back into the civilian world. And I would encourage all of us listening to the show to think about how do we bring more of them into our organization. Now, if you ever head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you'll find links to all of today's resources. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast. for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.